It used to be all about the yellow ties, but now it's simply YouTuber lies. Transfer deadline day is over, but there are plenty of things to talk about. Far too much to fit into a really restrictive intro line. It's Saturday the 2nd of September. Welcome to Ramble Reacts. I'm Luke Moore.
And I'm Andy Brassel.
Hello, Andy. How are you today? A Saturday morning show.
Good. I still have my transfer deadline day voice on there, actually. I'll try and take the edge off that as we continue.
I saw you on the telly, actually. You had a pair of very skinny trousers on.
Yeah, but that wasn't on actual deadline day. And
right, but it was part of
the thing is, I didn't know I was going to be standing up at the big screen, and so someone tweeted me afterwards. Well, included me in the tweet. It said, "When you're doing the transfer show at 6 and recording Back to the Future 3 at 7."
Get a big pair of trainers on as well. That's why
I thought that was excellent. Yeah,
they use a lot of new young people on Sky Sports News around transfers now, as well as yourself. And they asked. What I like about it is I've got no beef with any of them. A couple of them I've met, and I think they're nice people. So this is not a dig, but what they do with these young people they've got from YouTube and from social media and stuff, is they ask them to do things they're simply not capable of. Like, get up and walk to the screen and start going through stuff. And it's really complicated broadcasting, and it's just, why are you making them do that? Anyway, listen, there was a load of transfers that came in. It was a crazy transfer deadline day, and we'll get through some of the transfers that I think are most relevant to our wonderful parish of Ramble listeners. But before we do that, it would be remiss of us not to talk about Luton 1, West Ham 2 last night. Luton huffed and puffed and tried to snaffle out a first win of the season truffle in their first top flight game at Kenilworth Road since 1992, but they came up short. Goals from Jared Bowen and Kurt Zouma meant West Ham went away with a 2-1 win, as I said, despite Mads Andersen's best efforts in injury time, which, I mean, Mads Andersen's kind of consolation goal late on was enjoyable because the commentator, I don't know who it was, I can't remember his name. Seb Hutchinson's just screamed, "A first Premier League goal for the old girl." And it made it sound like he was talking about Mad Answers like an old grandmother, which I found very enjoyable. But look, Andy, what did you make of the game?
Slightly disorientating because, of course, part of the huge improvements to Kenilworth Road, or part of the improvements to Kenilworth Road, is that the camera is now on the other side of the pitch, the main broadcast camera.
Yes,
which
that's one for the heads, that.
It's very, very confusing sort of business. As you know, I've had my sightline difficulties with Kenilworth Road in the past anyway. So
and with your age.
That's another one.
That's another dig at your age. I'm sorry, I'll stop them now.
I'm still skinny enough to get in between the houses, but not enough to get the under 18s price, and sadly not enough to get the old enough to get the over 65s one either. West Ham always looked completely in control of this. I thought, and they had a few little bits to ride out, but you just had the feeling with Bowen and Paquetá, they had the best players on the pitch by a mile. I was pleased to see Jared Bowen score because the stuff the Luton fans was saying about his girlfriend was pretty repellent, and I really don't think people should have to put up with that.
No, I agree.
And yeah, it was pretty comfortable for West Ham, who looked really like stable and good.
Yeah, I thought the ball from Paquetá for Bowen's goal was sensational. He's an amazing operator, and the most worrying thing for Luton, I think, in that is that at times it looked like a mismatch, right? And I don't take any particular pleasure in kind of bagging on Luton all the time because it's an amazing story, and I'm pleased that they're in the Premier League. I kind of feel like I flip between being patronising to them and then being overly harsh on them, and I don't really want to do either of those things, but it's very difficult to ignore the evidence that's in front of your eyes, and unfortunately for Luton, the thing that should be frightening for their fans should just be that, yes, Paquetá's a good player, yes, Bowen's a good player, yes, James Ward-Prowse is incredible from set pieces, yes, Antonio's a brilliant lone frontman, but this is the standard, right? It doesn't really get any easier than this, and if you're looking at the start of the season and you earmark a game, they probably were, not really knowing how West Ham were going to start the season, they're probably earmarking a game at home to West Ham on Friday night and going, right, we can get it pumping in here, we can really go after West Ham, we can get a result. Of course, as Napoleon said, you'd rather be a lucky general than a good one. Rob Edwards isn't a lucky gem at the moment because he's come up against West Ham in an amazing bit of form, and they just didn't really look like they were capable. It's not to say they didn't have chances. No. Of course, they were able to score late on, but it just felt like a bridge too far.
It felt like a gap, didn't it? I mean,
there's work to do for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
for sure.
I suppose though, if you're Luton, you take solace from the fact that they're playing a team who are not just much better than them at the moment, but much better than them. Period, and they managed to stay in the game. So I think they've not been humiliated in any of their games so far. They had a little go at Chelsea, and they even had a little go at Brighton for a bit. And you're talking about teams that these are not the teams that they're expected to compete against. If you get a point here and there, then great. But I think the proof will be when they start playing other sides that were expected to be in the bottom third. That's something that will be different. And obviously there was always going to be a huge amount of emotion in this. I don't want to say first Premier League home game, even though I suppose factually that's what it is, but first top flight home game for 35 years or whatever. It's something that's huge. And for the players, they're acclimatising to being back in their stadium because, as we know, the work on it went right up to the deadline as well. So look, they'll have better days than this. If there's a day to be worried about Luton, it is not this day, I would say.
Okay. So it's 31 years, I think, since they've been up there.
Right.
Based on what you're saying then is the next 3 Premier League games they've got are crucial then because there's away to Fulham, home to Wolves and away to Everton, right?
Well, especially those last 2, right?
That's big potatoes. That is big potatoes.
And what you were talking about, though, with what everyone's expecting from Luton or not expecting from Luton, all the pressure is on Wolves and Everton for those games. Like, if they drop a point against Luton, people say, right, you're definitely going down then, aren't you?
Yeah, true. Look, I think what we should do is we should, put Luton fans out of their misery and say, look, we're going to move on from that now. It was great to see them under the lights on the old TV. The camera angles and stuff, as you mentioned, are kind of a throwback. They also remind me a bit of Fratton Park, which gives me a nice warm feeling because there's no chance I'm going to be watching Pompey in the Premier League anytime soon. But
should they have got a bellman on a transfer deadline
always
day?
With the bellman, you lot. Every single time. I can't get through an episode.
Well, we know you're such a big fan of him. We just...
I told you my favourite story about the John Westwood, the bellman at Pompey, right? I'll just re-up it quickly for the listeners because obviously on Friday we talked about Tiki Rainbow, so a little throwback is never far away. I was sat quite near John Westwood once, the bellman at Fratton Park, because I couldn't get my regular seat. I can't remember, it was years ago, some kind of reason I couldn't get my regular seat. And at half-time, I think it might be the season or 2 since Portsmouth had been promoted into the Premier League, so they were getting a lot more coverage. And Johnny Westwood had become this kind of weirdly famous fan, right, as I'm sure you guys remember.
Yeah.
And at half-time, the kids were going up to him and asking him for his autograph. And it was really, I was really near to one of the kids and his dad, and the kid came running back, and the dad grabbed him angrily and said, "Next time you want an autograph from a BO smelling pisshead, you come and see your old man, all right?" So anyway, look, I think what we'll do is we'll promise to Luton Town fans listening to this that when Luton finally win a Premier League game, we'll promise we'll cover them. So we'll keep it even. We won't be biased. We're not going to be we're not going to take some kind of agenda against Luton and cover them every time they lose. If they lose every single game this season, that's not on us. But hopefully they won't.
Also, if they're going to play on transfer deadline day, which them and West Ham, both of them, I mean, it's sacrilegious. What do they think they're doing? Playing actual football on transfer deadline day.
What's Mick Harford doing in the stand? Go and get the business done, Mick. You're the face of this club. Right, let's move on to deadline day because it was an absolutely insane day, and I'm always kind of conscious that I don't want to be someone who's like a cheerleader for this whole foul jamboree. But I think when we talk about the Ramble's commitment to or contribution to the ridiculous transfer fees in football, I think our contribution is fairly minimal, so we've got to cover it. I think we should start with João Palhinha. His move to Bayern Munich collapsed as the 5 p.m. deadline passed in Germany. And of course, because Marcus couldn't be here today for this Ramble Reacts, we simply had to get his reaction to the news, given how worried he was. I mean, he's been up all night, every night for about a week, just playing João Palhinha slide tackles in his head, thinking, I wonder if I'm ever going to love again. So we got him to share his thoughts, and here's what he had to say.
Well. Who knew that the German transfer window shut at 5 p.m. on the 1st of September 2023? For all those who kindly offered their thoughts and prayers, save them for another day. I won't need them now. I do feel a little sorry for Big João, if I'm honest with you, because he's deserved his move to a bigger team, because he is absolutely brilliant. And they don't come much bigger than Bayern Munich, of course. But for now, I'm just glad that we'll have at least another 5 months of Big JP back at Craven Cottage, maybe even a full season. And most importantly, I'm a little bit less worried about a relegation scrap this season now.
Yeah, fully resplendent with the children in his care coughing in the background. I think you got a feel for Marcus. I think you got to be dancing on the streets of Marcus Speller at this news, haven't you?
Yeah, it sounds like one of his sons is perhaps a Bayern fan, choking back the tears there.
Yeah.
As their deadline day turned to shambles, really. And just to quickly talk about it from a Bayern perspective, they tried to buy Declan Rice earlier in the transfer window. They said their big things we knew their big things were to sign a world-class defensive midfielder and a world-class centre-forward. They got one of those. And how have they left it this late? Like, honestly, how have they left it this late? Palhinha can't have been a player who they thought of on Wednesday afternoon and thought, oh, yeah, maybe we'll give him a try. And if they did, that says a lot about how shambolically things are run there, which I think puts a bit of a question mark over Harry Kane's ability to win multiple trophies there. But from Fulham's perspective, Marcus is absolutely right. It's huge for them, and the lack of replacement was why they didn't let him go. When they were signing him, I always felt they were going to sign him to sell him on later. They were getting a good deal. Clearly, when he shone in the Premier League, as everyone who knew him already knew he would be able to do, once he was Premier League proven, they were always going to be able to make a sizable profit. But now, of course, he's joined, Luke, the noble list of players who've worn the shirt of their new club, new in inverted commas club, had the photos, done the interview with the club TV channel, and then it's been all called off. It's Fekir to Liverpool again. It is.
It's going to be it's going to be featured in a Instagram account that gets started in about 2030 of transfers that never happened, and he's going to feature in that.
I would love to see that.
I expect.
Because, a similar thing happened to José Mourinho last week. Obviously, he was leaving Wolves. Looked like he was going back to Porto. He actually not only took the photos and did the interview with the club channel, he signed the contract. And Sergio Conceição, the coach, was having a knee operation at the time. And when he came out of hospital, he's like, well, I didn't want to sign him. You won't get any minutes under me, pal. So I ended up ripping it up and he signed for Braga instead.
Going back to Palhinha, as you said, he completed a couple of medicals and all this media, but Fulham blocked the transfer, which I found quite surprising because, in these days of player power and stuff, and Marcus and I have talked and locked horns about this type of thing in the past around Harry Kane, like, it strikes me it's quite surprising that Fulham were able to kind of pull the levers and say, you're not going because we need a replacement and we haven't got one, so it's tough tits. Normally that doesn't really tend to happen, so fair enough to Fulham for standing their ground. They tried to get, apparently, according to reports, they tried to get Scott McTominay, but he rejected the move, which I thought was strange on his part as well, because I think that'd be a great move for him. But anyway, he stays. Palhinha stays in the Premier League. It's great news for Premier League fans because, he's one of the best players in that position in the Premier League. I mean,
Great.
People will talk about Rodri, but aside from him, I mean, it's pretty slim pickings on who's better than old JP. Elsewhere, Fulham have signed Alex Iwobi for £22 million, an astonishing amount of money in my view, but it's a player they've been after for a while. Someone pointed out to me on social media actually that I was overly harsh on Iwobi because he actually contributed 7 Premier League assists last season. So fair enough, I hold my hands up there. Not the first time I've been wrong. Won't be the last time. Won't be the last time on this show, even, I wouldn't have thought. So a quick line on that, Andy, on Iwobi moving to Fulham. is he Wes Anderson movies? Is he a Wes Anderson movie writ large, or is he actually going to make an impact?
Oh, look, maybe he will. It's difficult for anyone to flourish in an Everton situation, and given their propensity for missing chances, those 7 assists are probably worth about 28, aren't they? So, maybe he should be the leading assist provider in the Premier League once he makes it.
So he's the new Kevin De Bruyne. Great. I'm pleased we got that squared away.
Yeah, there we go. I mean, for me, it's disappointing that Lucas Campos didn't make it. He was the one I was really looking forward to seeing the Premier League.
You can't have them all, Andy.
No.
You can't open your presents on Christmas morning and not be grateful.
I mean, that does happen. You've got that to look forward to.
Well, guess what? You're not welcome at my house on Christmas morning. Let's go a little bit further north. Let's go to Manchester and look at who Man United have signed, because Sergio Reguilón on loan from Spurs is kind of fairly interesting, chiefly because he's been out of favour. He's been away on loan, where I believe he was out of favour as well.
Yes.
But Man United wanted him as cover, I guess, and he's available for selection this weekend. That's kind of fairly interesting. But the one I think's probably much more interesting is the completion of the signing of Fiorentina midfielder Sofian Amrabat, who it seems to be someone that Erik ten Hag has identified as the solution to their midfield problems, and obviously a player who was desperate to go to Man United, and Fiorentina were desperate to sell him. How do we square that circle? Because United really wanted him. He seems to be someone who can make a big contribution, yet Fiorentina wanted rid of him, and he really wanted to go. So what's the reason that they were able to get him, and what's the reason that Fiorentina were so keen to get rid?
Well, since he came back from the World Cup, they've been looking to sell Amrabat for a year plus, and they couldn't find the right deal last summer. Inter and Spurs were really interested, and it looked like he was going to Spurs at one point. But I think the problem was he went to the World Cup and came back and wasn't quite at it, and they're annoyed with him. It took him a while to get back into the team. I think it affected the relationship between club and player over long term. Now, of course, it worked out pretty well in the end because he was good in the back half of the Conference League campaign. He was the best player on the pitch in the final with West Ham. And that's him all over, isn't it? He's a big game player. But they wanted to dump him because they wanted to move on. Now, I think it's difficult because you leave him out because you don't want him to get injured, because you want to sell him. And then it becomes a position that you can't really row back from. So they left him out of training for a while. I wonder if the international break has come at the right time, that they can get him in some sort of fitness, some sort of match fitness, because he's had quite a truncated prep for those reasons to the season. But look, I think he'll be great for them. He's definitely got the level for United. I think anything that can steer them away from leaning on Casemiro to the extent they do is a really important thing, because they're expecting to play 55, 60 matches this season. So that's something that they need to avoid. Reguilón's a funny one, because I think a lot of people look at that, and probably United fans look at that and think that's a bit deflating. But the reality is, they've got 2 quality left backs who they haven't given up on, who are just unavailable at the moment. So they can't really go out and sign another A+ level one, especially when they believe so much in those. It's the most temporary of loans. And the fact is, every Premier League club is in a situation where they've got loads of players that they want to get rid of. I mean, to a certain extent, you've got the Saudi Pro League now, which, as Chelsea have found, is a great dustbin for the players you don't want on massive wages who are impossible. That's not
in their marketing material.
It should be.
I agree.
You can have that one for free. Well, maybe 10 million tax free. Anyway, I think the thing there is that because if the Saudi Pro League don't want to take your players, Premier League clubs are going to have to start dealing with each other more, because this is something we saw in Italian football going back 20, 25 years. That I think it's shocking to people how many transfers there are between the biggest clubs. But realistically, some of those players on massive wages, only the other biggest clubs can afford them. You need to deal with the clubs that are on your level.
You say that, and obviously an example we've seen of that is Cole Palmer moving from Man City to Chelsea, which I think is a really strange move. He's a great young player, and clearly he's not getting the minutes and all the rest of it. But every time I see Chelsea sign yet another young player for something like 40 million, I feel like Jeff Goldblum in the beginning of Independence Day, where I'm saying, something's going wrong here. Like, everyone needs to listen because this is not good. And everyone's going, oh, shut up, Jeff. You don't know what you're fucking talking about. It's going to be fine. Before you know it, aliens have blown up the White House. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying Stamford Bridge is going to be blown up by extraterrestrials in like a fiery inferno, but it kind of doesn't feel like it's not a good thing that's happening, right? So we won't do Cole Palmer because I think it's kind of there's other things we want to talk about, but there's an example there, isn't there, of that happening. I kind of totally understand your point. Man United have also given Johnny Evans a 1-year deal, which I think is a good idea. I think that's a kind of bit of a risk-free no-brainer. They've signed Fenerbahce's Altay Bayindir as well. The big one out of Man United before we move on is just, and I want to focus on players that are coming into the Premier League rather than players that are going out for obvious reasons, but just before we move on, Mason Greenwood has got a move. He's moved to Getafe in Spain on loan. An interesting one for all the reasons that everyone knows about already, and if you want to hear our take on the Mason Greenwood situation, you can go back a few episodes and here it is.
And it's worth doing so. It's worth doing so.
It is worth doing so, I think, yeah. But the guy who's running things at Getafe was one of the first presidents to come out in criticism of Luis Rubiales.
Angel Torres,
yeah. He thinks that he somehow managed to squirt the circle in his brain and say it's still fine for us to sign Mason Greenwood. A quick line from you on that, Andy, before we move on.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite difficult to stomach. I think it's fair to say, and especially the video that Getafe did on social media of 15 fans jumping up and down as they learnt the news outside the stadium. I think it could be handled with a bit more class and contrition if it's something that they are going to do. But when you saw people very disingenuously talking on social media a week or so ago about how Mason Greenwood has been cancelled. Well, his contract hasn't been cancelled. He's been loaned and he's going to be getting 75k a week. His United fee, which from what I understand, Getafe are making quite a piecemeal contribution to over the next little while. I mean, am I surprised? No, not massively. I mean, I think you've seen recently with 2 instances of La Liga clubs promoting in Russian language coverage of La Liga to a market that everyone else has cut ties with.
Yeah, right.
Maybe they just don't give a shit. It is quite depressing, though.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. I think it also smacks of like a non-decision from Man United, just to kind of let's just dust this under the carpet for a while and see if it all goes away. Still, even after all the shit they're coming out with, which I thought was a load of old nonsense. But like we've done that. I mean, I just wanted to make that kind of reference there because it is, I guess it's a kind of, if you like, some sort of culmination to the situation we've been talking about. Look, I'll tell you what is a really interesting signing, possibly the most interesting signing of the window for me. I heard you talk about it on Ask OTC yesterday. You unfavourably compared him, I thought, in a very unfair way, to Donny van der Beek. Ryan Gravenberch has signed for Liverpool on a 5-year deal. Now, I do want to bring you in on this, but before I do, I just want to give you my take. I think he's a really good player, and I thought when he signed for Bayern Munich, I know you said that Bayern Munich got him perhaps a little bit more early than they thought they would. I was really excited to see what he could do. It seemed like a really, really exciting prospect. And then he found himself, of course, behind Goretzka, Kimmich and Lima in Bayern Munich's midfield, and he's not really obviously kicked on. He's not really played that much, certainly not played as much as he wanted to. Klopp's been a big admirer of him for a long time, but Liverpool in recent transfer windows, particularly around midfielders, as in traditional midfielders, I'm not talking about the kind of attacking players that kind of nominally are midfielders on Fantasy Premier League but actually aren't midfielders. I mean, when it comes to actual midfielders, it's not been a brilliant track record recently. I'll give you a couple of examples. Of course, Wataru Endo is kind of, the jury's still out. He only signed for him a few weeks ago. But I mean, players such as, and so I would say the same about McAllister as well, but players such as Artur Melo and Fabio Carvalho, I suppose, is a bit more of an attacking player. But, they've not had an amazing record recently with midfield players. The midfield is a problem for Liverpool because they keep losing them and they can't get good ones in. So what do we think about Gravenberch? I always think of him as a kind of a straight central midfield player who can play a bit more defensively, but you seem to think of him as a much more attacking-minded player who would need to be coached to play more defensively. So what's he going to do for Liverpool? Is it going to be good? Stick your neck on the line. I don't want to hear on one hand this, on the other hand this. Tell me what the fuck's going on.
Well, apart from the fact that you've just outed yourself as listening to the social media clip of Ask OTC rather than the whole thing, which we'll discuss after the show.
I ain't got time for that shit, right? I created OTC. I passed it on. I moved on. What do you think this is? I've got a 3-month-old son.
I think Gravenberch will be really good for them.
I'm listening to Football Weekly, mate. I haven't got all day. I'm listening to all those amazing athletic shows. Listen to the new Lineker one.
Thank you. Right, I know my place. I think he'll be really good for them. I also think it will take time because, as you say, he hasn't played much in the last year. I mean, he's not played a lot of football as a defensive midfielder. I think that's got to be made
but can
clear
he do
from
it?
The start. Yeah, I think he can. And the people around him and the coaches who've had him believe he can be. But like I said, he will need to be coached into that. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Because of the range of passing he's got, I think there's definitely the temptation to play him a little bit further forward as well. You know, I think he can have that box-to-box contribution in the Premier League. But the reason I compared him to Donny van der Beek is because he's a sort of a Bayern, a victim of circumstance and a victim of timing, really. As I said, the club saw it as an opportunity and bought him. And really, it's an incredible profit. They've more than doubled their money on a player who's played, started 3 league games for them.
That's what Premier League do to you. That is what Premier League is there for.
It's an incredible business.
We'll help you out. Don't worry about it.
If you can get it. But look, this is very different, say, to the Artur Melo signing because Artur was a panic signing, an opportunity signing. As you say, Gravenberch is someone that Klopp has been interested in for a very long time. So this is a continuity signing.
Liverpool also... This is a story that blew my mind to bits. I mean, I'm interested in Gravenberch. I said it's possibly the most interesting one, and we'll see how it transpires. But a really interesting aspect of the transfer window late on, I thought, was Liverpool reportedly turning down 150 milli from Al Ittihad for Mo Salah, right? And I don't know if this is the case. This could just be... I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Like, there's such a blur between, you know, reality and fiction here, you know, the thin line between entertainment and war and all that, that, you know, you don't know what's true and what isn't. And there's been reports that Al Ittihad are prepared to bid £200 million for Salah, which obviously, if we put aside the obscenity of the amounts of money on scale, you know, the unbelievable greed that's on display, like, that £200 million bid may or may not materialise, but the £150 million one apparently did. I think, regardless of who he is, I think that's an incredible amount of money to turn down for a player of his age. I mean, I think you could... You know, I know Liverpool, he's popular at Liverpool. He's been amazing, to say the least. He's, you know, arguably the figurehead of what they've achieved under Klopp. But ultimately, you know, everything moves on. Everything... He's obviously not getting any younger. His contract's not getting any longer, etc., etc. I was actually quite surprised they didn't want to do business on that at that amount of money. But did you feel the same?
Partially. Again, I think it's timing. If this is a discussion they have a month ago, then maybe Liverpool can think about it. But the problem is the sort of level at which you need to replace Mo Salah, it's not a deal you can pull together in like a day and a half. You know, you need a plan for that. And he is a huge part of what they still do. I think as well, Liverpool can afford to play the clock a little bit because he is a player that they know is of such value.
I'm always doing that.
Pardon?
I'm always doing that, mate.
I think there's such value of Salah to the Saudi Pro League because, you know, he's the ultimate Arab superstar. So, you know, they'll be prepared to pay the same next year, even if there's like less time on his contract. And, dare I say it, when he's 32, getting off the last year of his contract when they ended up paying Salah more than they wanted to keep him on that last contract. And whereas it might be not a chicken feed, but a relatively small deal for the Saudi Pro League, any Saudi Pro League club who would pay him 3-4 times that. it's a big deal to Liverpool. It could give them a great amount of freedom. I agree, moving on, going forward. But next summer, I think with the timescale, they just couldn't afford to do it right now.
I think I've been thinking about it, and I think I know what happened. I think Liverpool did want to accept it, but then Salah said, "I am not playing under Nuno." It's as simple as that. I am not playing under Nuno.
Did he say I'm not playing under Nuno, or did he say I'm not playing next to Karim Benzema, especially if he wants to be the captain?
Well, Liverpool could have said, "Give us Kante on loan, or give us Benzema on loan, and we'll talk about it." But of course, Saudis aren't in the business of letting players leave, are they? That's just not how it is.
They will be in a month. Trust me.
Yeah, well, quite. Let's just round up the transfer thing on Brennan Johnson, because I think that's a great one for Spurs.
Agreed.
He's moved from Nottingham Forest for £45 million. I like the way Spurs are going about it, I have to say. Daniel Levy is the type of character he is, and we haven't got to go over that because we talked about him to death for years and years and years. So everyone knows Daniel Levy's all about, right? What I like about Ange Postecoglou is the confidence he shows. I loved how he handled the Kane thing publicly. I thought he was a big pair of shoulders and just kind of took responsibility, said, no, we're a bigger club than that. This is not how it is. No player's bigger than the club, effectively. I think the unconfident thing to do after Kane would have gone, particularly given that, the player they've really got who plays up front for them is Richarlison, who just doesn't score goals. I know he scored in the Cup recently, but he just doesn't really score goals. The unconfident thing to do would be, right, we need to find a striker who's going to get us 20 Premier League goals a season, and we need to move heaven and earth to get him in, and we need to do it now. They haven't done that.
Agreed.
They've gone after a forward who can play slightly wider, but is a kind of modern forward who's really dynamic, fast, fits into the way Postecoglou wants to play. Brennan Johnson is not a player who scored an incredible amount of goals at Premier League level, but they're kind of believing in the system, right? They're believing in the process, and I think they kind of understand now that actually it's a fool's errand trying to replace Harry Kane's goals. What we need to do is get a system and a team and a dynamic where everyone can kind of contribute, right?
Exactly, and the whole point is you're not replacing just Harry Kane's goals. If you're trying to replace him as a totem, as a playmaker, like trying to replace a player who has about 3-4 different functions in the team, it just doesn't work. We've seen like Manchester United partially botch that the first time Cristiano Ronaldo left. Dortmund made a mess of it when Lewandowski left. It's just not possible. So to back away from doing that, so have plan and process rather than panic, I think is definitely the way to go. I completely agree with you. Also, I think with Spurs, we look at the way that they blew the Gareth Bale money, not very successfully. I mean, obviously they did get like Christian Eriksen in that slush of players that worked out quite well. I'm not saying Munge anymore. I've moved on from that. But I think they've got to be a bit careful about that, and I think they have been careful about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good move. I think he fits perfectly into what they want to do. He's an exciting player. It's sad for Nottingham Forest because, of course, he's really been symbolic with their recent success, and he's been fantastic. But they got a good fee. Forest also, I mean, by the way, they've been busy themselves as per usual. They signed 7 players on deadline day, including Callum Hudson-Odoi from Chelsea and Divock Origi on loan from Milan.
They've had a really quiet window generally, hadn't they? And then you go to bed and you wake up and they've signed 5 players.
Yeah, it's great. I think I've always been quite sort of sympathetic towards Callum Hudson-Odoi, who was like hugely rated. He had that on and off thing with Bayern Munich for ages, and now has just become a bit of a forgotten man through no real fault of his own that I know of. So it'd be good to see if he can have a restart and kind of turbocharge his career, because I think if he can find that form again, with respect to Nottingham Forest, a club at the level they're at, he could be sensational for them. Yeah,
but that's the level he's at as well, because he wasn't great for Leverkusen last year. So it's good that he's got not a loan but a 3-year contract where he can actually concentrate on knuckling down and fulfilling some of that potential.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that's the whistle-stop tour of transfers on deadline day. Before we move on to the European competitions draw, I just want a quick line on the fact that Andy Carroll has signed for French second-tier club Amiens. He'll wear the number 99 for the club, and the reason I wanted to mention it is because it's a lovely little move, and Carroll's a bit of a cult hero here at Ramble Towers. But the reason I wanted to mention the move is because the person who broke that news to me, all the way from Japan on his holidays, was Pete Donaldson, who just shared a link with me. Just underneath, he just commented, "Lay Smirnoff ice." Which is presumably what Andy Carroll's asking for right now, somewhere in France.
Probs. I don't know if you can ask for Metz that far north, but it's funny because they in the presentation video they showed him going up the stairs to the top of their stadium, and they're quite, as Marcus puts it, they're quite Jurassic Park-esque arena, the Licorne, and at the top it plays the music. The music is actually Andy by Lerita Misuko, which is a very famous song in France. I know because he will go through what I went through, and people will come up and sing it to him like 3 times a week, and it goes Dis-moi oui, Andy. So that's why he gets to the top and he goes Je dis oui. So it was a very good video.
Skinny trousers, questionable trainers, appearances on TV, both called Andy. Both love getting smashed on Smirnoff Ice. Will the comparisons never end? But good luck to him, I say. Good luck to him. On the European draw thing that I trailed at the top of the show, we'll start with the Champions League. I mean, Arsenal and Man City have avoided kind of any of the traditional big clubs. I mean, Arsenal's group looks a bit like a...
That's one way of putting it.
Little Europa League tribute group to me. City have got RB Leipzig, I suppose, who they've got some recent history with. But really, the kind of headlines were Manchester United getting Harry Kane's Bayern Munich, as we now have to, contractually obliged to call them.
Yes.
Along with Galatasaray and FC Copenhagen. But Newcastle is the big headline. It's your neck of the woods. It's where you are currently sat as we record this show. They're back in the Champions League for the first time in however long, and they've been joined by PSG, Dortmund and Milan. Now, what normally happens when this kind of thing goes on is that people like me who don't really know anything about European football say, oh, that's a tough one. We suck through our teeth. We say we haven't got the tools in the van and say this is going to cost you. And then the people I like to call the well-actually crowd who know about European football come in and start talking about how those teams actually aren't that good anymore. And so don't worry about it. It's just a name. And Newcastle have got nothing to be scared of. I put it to you, Andy Brassel. Which of those two things is it for Newcastle?
I would edge towards the latter rather than the former. I think they've got a chance in this group, and they've got a chance of at least having to go for third, because remember, this is, as the last Champions League group stage ever, this is the last chance to finish third and get in the Europa League as well, because it'll all be reformatted next season.
That's the spirit.
As people know. So, Geordie's in Dublin for the Europa League final, anyone? Could be fun. But I think when you look at those, Dortmund, who were really rubbish last night, actually, at home to Heidenheim, in which they didn't win against a team that's never been in the top flight before and had never taken a point before last night. They've got a lot of talent, but look all over the place at the moment. Milan are having a semi-rebuild. And, of course, Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Christian Pulisic have come in. Pulisic has looked quite good early on, but, they're still not a vintage Milan side by any stretch of the imagination. And PSG are moving on from their whole Galacticos thing. I mean, they have Mbappe back. They still have Marquinhos. But, whether Ousmane Dembélé and young Bradley Barcola and Randall Kolo Muani are going to be the players to take them to the Champions League, that to me seems very, very unlikely. So I think Newcastle have maybe even got the best of both worlds, because you look at the length of time they've been out of the Champions League. I think you want bangers, you want big games that are
we're back. This is what it's all about, kind of thing. Yeah,
real
that's what Howe said. To be fair,
real occasions, and at the same time,
what Eddie Howe said.
At the same time, it's not completely impossible by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think.
I mean, I think also. We'd all be absolutely delighted to see PSG finish bottom of that group, wouldn't we? It'd be fantastic. We'd obviously be regretful that we're not going to get the old implosion around the quarterfinal stage. But get it out of the way early, get them out of there. That'd be brilliant. I do think you're right. I think in the same way that we talked about Luton embracing these massively tough but glamorous fixtures in the Premier League, I think you've got to apply that same logic to Newcastle in the Champions League. Right, they're back up there. The fans will obviously massively enjoy it, and some of the older fans will remember when they were in the Champions League in the 90s and have some great memories of that, and they're looking to make more memories now, and the less said about how they got there, the better, but we'll move on from that. Europa League, Brighton drew a kind of group of death of their own, I suppose, that Ajax, Marseille and AEK of Athens. I don't know too much about AEK, but I know that Ajax are regularly have a decent standard, and Marseille are a team that are well versed in playing in European competition as well. But when I say group of death on that, the reason I say that is because in the Europa League, it feels to me a bit like if you're a big club, you're kind of really just testing and adapting until you get to around the quarter-final stage, because
that's true.
You can normally expect to get some decent games, right? Brighton will look at that group and go, okay, that could have been a lot easier, particularly when you look at who, say, West Ham drew. To me, that looks slightly easier to them, but I'm speaking from a position of ignorance here, so maybe you disagree.
No, I don't, and I think
look at Liverpool's group, for example.
Yeah, when you compare the Champions League and the Europa League, people talk about the gap between the haves and the have-nots in the Champions League. It's far more pronounced in the Europa League group stage. There's no doubt about that. And I think if you're running a Premier League club's ticket office, I think there must be times when you get a Europa League draw and think, shit, how are we going to sell any of these?
Andy, I'd love for you and me to be running the Premier League ticket office. It'd be like that Bureau de Change sketch back in the day, the Chris Morris thing. I just smell a sitcom there. You and me running a ticket office for a Premier League club, and regularly things just go wrong. Or, as I like to call it, the Emirates Stadium. What about the Conference League? Aston Villa drew AZ Alkmaar, Legia Warsaw, and HSK Zrinjski. I don't know. I literally don't know who HSK Zrinjski even are, mate. So you're going to have to help me with that.
Well, look, I think the point is with Aston Villa, I just feel like I'm going to be repeating myself from West Ham last season. You look at the amount of money they've got, they've got to be winning that competition. And it's a weird thing to say at the start of a competition, right, that's the team that's going to win it. I know like you could get a team dropping out of the Europa League that might cause them a few difficulties. But realistically, Villa are the favourites to win that competition quite comfortably. Going back briefly to Brighton and what we were saying about them, and you can, I think, apply all of those points with Newcastle in that they're big names, they'll be exciting for the fans, but even more so, Brighton should be winning that group. All those teams have got issues at the moment, and AK fell well short against, and you may have called them Harry Kane's Bayern Munich. You definitely have to call them Toby Alderweireld's Royal Antwerp.
For sure.
They fell short against them. Marseille gave a 3-year contract to Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. I'm going to leave that there. And Ajax are the weakest they've been in a number of seasons.
That should be a ban.
Very doable for Brighton.
That should just be a ban. Right, basically, right, you've given a 3-year contract to Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. You're banned from European competition for the length of that contract. You want him there, you can't play in Europe. It's as simple as that. It's got to stop.
I thought of that recently. I couldn't get Aubameyang out of my head when I was watching the Lakers, the fictional Lakers series, Winning Time. And Dr. Jerry Buss gives a 25-year contract to Magic Johnson. Everyone in the dressing room's like, my God! Yeah. And he's like, yeah, what?
Yeah, but at least Magic Johnson is Magic Johnson.
Yes, at least Magic Johnson is Magic Johnson.
I was kind of, on a personal level, I was kind of a little bit upset not to see Aston Villa draw Klaksvik of the Faroe Islands, who've got like a kind of unremarkable, quite boring group that they'll probably get knocked out of. I'd love to have seen them play against a Fiorentina who are in there, or an Aston Villa, or even an Eintracht Frankfurt, who of course have done really well in Europe recently. Sadly, that wasn't to be. I think, look, we can't talk about the teams that are going to drop into that division, that competition, because we just don't know who they are yet.
No.
But with the exception of the aforementioned teams and probably Club Brugge, it's difficult to see where Villa slip up. But then it's all on them, isn't it? That brings its own pressure. But they should be. I mean, the money on display is absolutely right. The kind of purchasing power, the players they've got, they need to really be going deep in that. I mean, look what it can do for a club. Look at West Ham. Exactly. And then whatever you want to think about Aston Villa, you cannot make an argument that Unai Emery is not the best manager in that competition. I mean,
and remember, they've got the player who scored the first ever winning goal in a Europa Conference League final, Nicola Zaniolo. So
there we go.
There you go.
And Zaniolo was kind of a player who was going to go to a super club at one point. I mean, he was well highly rated. I mean, it's amazing to see him.
I mean, not at the point where he scored the winner in that final, but anyway.
No.
Hopefully he gets back to that point. He's great to watch when he's on it.
No. In fact, I am disrespecting Villa there. I don't fucking care. I hate it when broadcasters do that. I've no disrespect to so and so. I'll disrespect every club. I don't care.
Every disrespect.
What are they going to do? They ain't going to do anything. And on that friendly note, basically me agreeing that I do disrespect every single professional club in football, we're going to wrap up. Thank you for listening to today's Ramble Reacts. A little bit longer than we planned, but look, Andy's a windbag. I don't shut up either, so what did you expect? Marcus is back hosting on Monday with Jim Vish and me, and we'll take in all the weekend's action there on that show. Enjoy the weekend's football. Have a great time. Stay safe. Look after yourselves, and I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. I know the Football Ramble's a big show, been around for a long time, but it genuinely does really help us and helps other fans to find us if you leave us a good review wherever you get your podcast. So do that. It takes about 5 seconds, and it really does help us. In the meantime, find us on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, on YouTube, or at Football Ramble. And remember to subscribe on your podcast app. In the meantime, we'll be back on Monday. We'll see you then. Thank you very much, Andy.
Cheers for watching another fantastic clip from the Football Ramble podcast. Make sure you click like on this video and subscribe to the channel, which means you will not miss a single upload.